Welcome to the HMO Property Show by investors for investors. Brought to you by the HMO Property Co, Australia's leaders in impact investing. Investments made with the intention to generate a measurable, beneficial social or environmental impact alongside a positive financial return. Catch us weekly as we discuss all things cash flow positive property investing.
Welcome back to the HMO Property Show. I'm your host, Neil Gibb, and this week I've got not only someone that's become a really good friend over the term of us working together, but also a very important cog in the wheel of bringing HMOs and all the NDIS properties that we've got coming through the market now as well. Very important piece of the jigsaw when it comes to protecting our assets. And today's guest is the lovely Karen Takken from MGA Insurance. Karen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Neil. Now I'm going to blush.
We met 2015, 2016, I think.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah. And I know for a fact, I was going to say, and I'm guessing, but I know for a fact that every single HMO that we have brought to the market has been insured through MGA and yourself and your team. And it's probably an important part to say that not just any MGA will insure the HMOs as well. That's right, isn't it?
It is. And look, most of the MGAs now do know that if they hear HMO, multi-lease, they do tend to pass them on to us. But there's still a few rogues out there who'll give it a go and try and insure you. Yeah. Please make sure you come to us.
And you are the HMO, co-living, boarding house, lodging house, rooming house, whatever category you want to call it, you are the expert when it comes to this.
Pick a name, that's us. Multi-lease, you call it. I'm in.
So for the people that maybe don't understand what insurance is and why we need it, what is insurance and why do we need insurance, especially when it comes to property investing?
So it's the protection of your assets, isn't it? It's sharing the risk of something happening with an underwriter, with another party. It's making sure that if something unexpected happens to you, you're not thrown into a financial puddle of mess. Why do you need it? For all those reasons. Like you need it for all of those reasons. If you have a house burned down tomorrow, I don't know about you, but I don't have a quick, 500 grand in the bank that I could just pull out and chuck on and build another one. And look, you've heard me preach it before. House is a house, it's something, it's an item. Let's talk about insurance and liability and how very important it is for you to have liability insurance. And I preach that one over and over again. That's the really important factor. That's the biggest risk that you have in anything of something going wrong and pulling you down.
So what's the difference between being insured for the property that we own and having liability insurance?
So obviously, the property insurance game is just, the house burns down in a fire. We have a storm. We have a flood. We have malicious damage occurring by our tenants. Any of those sort of unexpected things that occur. That's what's going to kick the insurance policy into place, and they're going to replace it, or they're going to fix it, they're going to repair it. But let's say in amongst all of that, you end up with a tenant being injured. If you don't have that liability, cover in place, they're going to take you to court. Someone's going to take you to court, whether it be the tenant, whether it be their parents, whether it be their family. They're going to take you to court for injuries. They're going to take you to court if there's been a death. They're going to look at you to replace, lost income. They're going to look at you to pain and suffering. That's where your liability insurance comes into play. And that's where if someone sues you, you're going to lose all your money. You've got lawyer fees. Whether you're negligent or not, you still have to take it to court. Again, if you haven't got a quick 500 in the bank, I don't know what lawyers are charging these days, but I know that you'd eat through a big chunk of cash really quickly.
Absolutely. And when it comes to liability and household insurance, are these two different policies that we need to take out, or can we get something that encompasses both?
We make sure that everything's included in one package. Okay, so it will always be in that one package. When you need to look out for it being something separate, is when you're looking at your business insurances, perhaps some of your contract works types insurances. That's when you've got to make sure that you're ticking all of those sections and making sure you've got the liability cover in there as well.
And insurance is one of them things where we take it out and we pay for it in the hope that we never really have to use it. It's a tricky one, and it sounds scary the way you explained it there. These things are scary that can happen. We invest all this money into a property, we're not insured correctly, it burns down. We're left with a block of land with no property on it, and we need to come up with a solution to get that property back on there so we can start generating cash flow again. Then comes the other side of things, and I think was it you that tells the story about the guy that gets hit by a golf ball?
Yeah, tell that one a lot.
Yeah, take us through, Karen, because it's a good story.
Well, and it can happen anywhere, but if you take your golf clubs out to the driving range, and this is not so much even as a landlord, this is as a homeowner, okay? So you take your golf clubs down to the golf range, or at the, what do they call the other things? The golf course.
Golf course.
Golf course. You can tell I play a lot of sports. You're taking it down to the golf course and you swing and you hit your ball and it goes, yeah, which is probably where mine would go.
That's where mine goes.
Mine goes into the rough. And you hit someone on the head. Okay, yeah, it's funny, la, 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 we have a laugh. But what happens if you hit them in the right spot and next thing they're down on the ground and they've got brain damage or they're dead? Okay, again, someone's going to come after you. Now, were you negligent or were you just out playing golf? That's for Judge Judy to decide. But you still have to come up with the funds to pay your lawyers to prove that you weren't negligent. And that's where, again, your liability insurance comes into play. Now, if you haven't got a contents insurance policy or a home and contents insurance policy as Joe Blow homeowner, where are you going to get that money from? Ring up mum.
Exactly. It's again, it's one of them things that you need to take out and you need to pay for in the hope that you never need to use it, isn't it?
Correct. And look, what are the chances of knocking someone out in the golf course? Highly unlikely. What about walking down the street and it's raining and you put your umbrella up and you poke someone's eye out? That's probably more likely with me being a club. Again, it's not something that's likely to happen, but there is a risk there that it can. What about your dog running out on the street in front of a car?
All possible
That's your
things.
property. All things that can happen. It's so important to make sure. A lot of people, and look, my youngest son's girlfriend, I was talking to her the other day and she says she hasn't got contents insurance. Of course, I picked myself up off of the floor and I said the same thing to her. What happens if, where are you going to come up with that money? You're only 28. Where are you going to go to in life once you've been sued and you've got nothing? So, yeah, really important. Just because you think you haven't got anything, hey, I've got a mobile phone and a couple of clothes, got a couple of nice handbags, but that's it. It's not about those items. It's about making sure that you've got the liability insurance attached to them.
It's pretty hard hitting. It's people that may have never considered this previously will probably be listening to this and thinking, oh my God, this is like doomsday, but it's such an important thing to consider, isn't it?
That's my job. Are you feeling nervous? Are you petrified? I've done my job well. I am always the bringer of doom and gloom, but it's very important. And look, you can weigh up the risks. Feel free to weigh up the risks, but, for the premiums, do it. Look after your family, do it.
Yeah, I agree. And when it comes to property investing in general, we've obviously got the standard landlord's policy, which only covers us for the actual property itself, not for the contents. Is that correct?
So you can choose sections.
Right.
So when someone says landlord insurance, a lot of people will very often go to, oh, that's rent default, loss of rent, malicious damage, those sort of things, those landlord protections. But really what a landlord insurance policy is, it's your building as an investor. So it's an investment property, a home you're not living in. It's the contents included there in your goods and chattels. Okay,
Right.
so carpets, blinds, light fittings. Depending on where you are in the country, air conditioning units, if they are split systems, will be contents. So, you've got to try and figure that out. Or if you're giving it to a tenant fully furnished, well, you need to ensure those contents that you're supplying for the tenant's use. Then that's the second section. Then you've got the third section, which are your landlord covers. So you've got your rent defaults, your malicious damages by tenants, accidental damage by tenants, importantly, loss of rent. And then you go to your final section, which is your liability cover. So if you think of it like a full package.
And that explanation that you just give us there, is that standard residential investment properties? We're not talking about the core living, boarding house, lodging house sort of policy, which we're going to dig into right now. So what's the difference between a normal landlord policy and the three items that you explained there, and a HMO core living insurance policy?
Multi-lease, all of the above.
Multi-lease, yeah.
They look very, very, very similar, bar the fact that there's a couple of exclusions in our multiple lease style. Anything that's multi-lease, there's a couple of exclusions. And look, the exclusions are usually rent default. Why are they excluded? You don't need them. You really don't need them. If you've got a good property manager and you're managing your property correctly, rent default's a really expensive cover to include. It's based on that dollar value. So obviously in these multi-lease properties, it's a higher figure. Because it's not, 350, 400 a week, it's 300 by however many rooms that you've got and whatever it might be. So that increases the price. With a multiple lease property, you're not going to have all of your tenants default at one time, unless you're a really bad landlord and they have a group meeting around the table and then they go off and get their own house. But honestly, you'll have one person default, and that's going to be a sixth of your income or a fifth of your income. Now, your property manager will be on it and they'll have them out, and then they'll be looking for another tenant. With rent default, you have an excess of whatever it may be. You also have to exhaust a 4-week bond. Whether you've taken it or not, you have to exhaust it. So by the time the insurance company starts paying you some money, it's like 7.5, 8 weeks down the track. If you've got a good property manager, you've got another tenant back in there by then.
Yeah, so 2, 3, 4 weeks.
Yeah,
should be replaced.
Yeah, exactly. And that's your bond that's being chewed and your insurance excess, which you've got to exhaust anyway. So it's excluded from most policies. Even if it was available, I think I would tend to talk most people out of it. It's expensive and you're never going to claim on it. A waste of time. Whereas loss of rent, totally different thing altogether. I won't let you walk. I'll argue every time to a blooming face to keep loss of rent.
What's the difference between loss of rent and default of rent?
Yes, obviously we won't go through default rent and bore everybody again. But loss of rent, now that is where you're paid the rent that you would have been receiving from your tenants after an event. So we had a kitchen fire. Property is now uninhabitable because you must have a kitchen for people to eat, cook, live in. So the insurance company is going to come in and they're going to pay you your $60,000 to fix your kitchen, and they're going to give you that rental loss because your tenants have got to move out. So don't get it wrong. We're not paying for your tenants to stay in a hotel. So don't tell them that you're going to, subsidise their rent or whatever. They're going to stop paying rent because they're no longer at the property. There'll be an arrangement with their property manager on how that's going to work. And then the insurance company is going to pay you what you would have been receiving. So your cash flow is still there. You can still pay your mortgage. Things move on.
Good.
The difference between the normal And a multiple lease is that under a standard landlord policy, you have, everybody has to move out of that property. If you've got a damaged bedroom in Johnny's room, he can go and bunk in with his sister. Multiple lease, you're renting that room. If something happens in your room that makes it unoccupiable, you can't go and sleep on the couch. It's a common area. You can't bunk in next door, right? So your loss of rent is on the room level instead of the house level.
Yeah, good. See, I get a lot of people reaching out to me, Karen, especially over the last 2 years. And we'll talk about the premiums because they have increased over the last few years. So a lot of people have reached out to me because previously when they invested in an HMO, for instance, and the premiums were between $1,500 and $2,000, now they've increased and they've gone off and spoke to some other insurance brokers or underwriters, and they believe that they have then received a landlord policy which covers them for multi-room. Do you see that often yourself?
Daily. It is daily that someone will say to me, but I've just gone to Ewing, or I've just gone to Blue Zebra, or I've just gone to Terry Shear. Now, what you've got, and that's what we call the direct market. Okay, so we're brokers. We have policies. We deal directly with our underwriters. So I'm talking to the man who has the pen. What happens when you ring up RACQ, Terry Shear, whatever? You've got a salesperson there who's paid on commissions. And she's got a list of questions in front of her or him. And each year asks those questions and you get a little green tick and nothing red flags. So you just go through the process and there's never any discussion about whether or not it's a multiple lease or how it's done. Even if you bring it up, unless they go and take that question to an underwriter, you don't really have an answer. You've got a salesperson who's told you over the phone that you're covered. Now, what we find is that very often people will go and they'll have this cover and they'll have that cheap insurance with Terry Shear or whatever for the year. Come renewal, an underwriter actually looks at those covers and he'll see notes on there where the salesperson said, yeah, we're going to cover you for multiple leases, and it'll be a decline to renew. And that's what I see a lot of. I'll have a lot of people saying, hi, Karen, we were with you last year, but we got cheaper at Terry Shear. Show me this year. They said they don't do multiple leases. And I go, start again. You've got to disclose everything right up front. Now, if you disclose everything and you then make sure you get it in writing from them, that's where it'll all come unstuck. Because the minute that salesperson goes to the underwriter to get it in writing, to give it to you in an email, the underwriter will say, what do you mean? We don't do multiple leases, and they'll pull the pin.
Yeah.
So we get it daily.
And this is the importance of having this policy in place and working with someone like Karen who understands what we are not only trying to achieve, but what we do achieve with these style of properties, the way we rent them out, the way the releases are written, the way that they're managed, the way that the inspections are done. Like all these things are important for the broker to understand so that they can help you get the right cover for your property. And yes, the premiums have increased, but try not paying for the premium and then your house burning down or your kitchen needs refitting. If you're paying $3,500 for your premium and it covers a $60,000 kitchen and bathroom refurb, money well spent.
Correct. And look, I understand where people are terribly upset with premiums. I am when I look at my house premium. Let's take it even outside of the multiple lease arena. My house premium increased by 40% this year. That hurt. It hurt. And I'm a broker. Do you know who I am? I'm Karen Takken. Didn't have much force, not as much as I thought it was going to have, right? But you've got to look at, there's been a lot of claims nationwide, and you can't look at insurance as, you've got to look at the amount of claims that are happening. We've had fires, we've had floods, we've got natural disasters happening left, right, and centre. We've got to look at the cost of building has gone up, which you've probably been more over than what I am, building costs have increased sky high. So, the cost of workmen, wages have gone up. So all of that attributes to these increases in premium.
And it's not as straightforward as just coming to you and say, Karen, can I have insurance? Is that there's certain things we've got to do with these properties to bring them up to the standard that's required for the insurance provider to cover them. That's correct.
Yeah. So, we're not insuring a single household. That's what it all comes back to again. We're insuring multiple households. We're insuring, 5, 6s, whatever we happen to be insuring. They're unrelated parties. So insurance has to view it, or they tend to view it in that way. So, we're looking at additional fire safety, and that's I talk that almost as much as premiums. Fire safety is the number one thing. And it's got to be upgraded. It has to meet the underwriter's minimum criteria, and it needs to be signed off by someone who is a recognised fire safety professional. And that has to happen once a year, because tenants have a tendency to tweak things in properties, for lack of a better terminology. So we have to make sure that that's there each year. Long-term leases. We don't want to be seen to be insuring your typical old-style boarding house. The lower socioeconomic, hey, someone's come in, they've, come into some money, they can sleep off the street for the night. It's a different risk. That's not what we're insuring. We're insuring beautiful properties where they're well maintained, they're well managed, they're new, they're looked after. So we want to have those long-term leases in place, which means that you're reviewing the tenant that you're putting in there. You're doing a check on them. You're making sure that they are a good fit for the rest of the household. What else we've got? Owners living in the property. No owners living in the property. Can't have twin shares in the property. So again, that turns it into a boarding house. You can have a blood relative, so mum and dad, or brother and sister, dad and son. That's okay, but you can't have Bob and George who met down at the pub and said, "Hey, let's go to Neil, get a room, and we'll just split it down the centre. It'll be cheaper for us."
Would that work if they were de facto partner, like husband and wife, or?
Yeah, de facto, same. Boyfriend, girlfriend. I don't know if you call them that anymore, but de facto is really what we're talking about. So yes, that's okay. That's an acceptable.
Yeah, cool. And with the fire safety installation that you mentioned there, we did have Data on the podcast. Yourself and Data have been good friends for many years, really. I mean, you two are both in Queensland and have worked together on multiple properties. I mean, worked on all of ours, to be fair. Data does all the sign-offs, we do the install, and you do the insurance together. So that's our little bubble, isn't it?
It's our bubble. It's our bubble. And look, when I see certain names, I go, this will be an easy one to quote, or this is going to be an easy one to look after, because you've got the right team looking after the fire, you've got the right team looking after the property management, you've got the right team on board, so that property is going to be run correctly. Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier as well, are people allowed to self-manage these properties and access the insurance policy, or does it need to be managed by a professional property management business?
Yes, they can manage it if they wish. We spoke earlier, we all know that my thoughts are, don't manage it yourself. It is, you can do it. You can do it. The insurance company is not going to increase the premium because you're self-managing it. They're not going to view it any differently to something that's managed by a professional. But come a claim, you're going to be in a world of pain if you have not followed every step. And that's why people have qualifications to manage these properties. There's so many new regulations coming through for tenant rights. It blows my mind. To be a property manager at the moment would just be murder. And, it's very hard to, I think, as well, to detach yourself from your property. You have emotional ties to that property. And again, it's very hard, I think, to manage them. My advice would be don't get yourself a good property manager every day of the week.
And it's not just that emotional connection as well. It's the systems and procedures that are in place so that you know that you're doing the right things at the right time. So we've got, first of all, when we take a property over, we've got a property condition report, which is a photographic report of the full property, so we know exactly what it's like when we've took the property over. Then we do ingoing reports of the people that move into the rooms, and then exit report when they move out of the room. So we've got photographic evidence before and after in the event of a claim.
And that's another insurance requirement that I may have missed.
Yep. Then we've got the fire safety requirement as well, which the property management team need to manage. And then, I mean, we've had to set up a full procedure. Let's imagine this now. We've got over 100 properties on our rent roll. And I think it's 6 monthly at the minute. Is it 6 monthly that the fire extinguisher needs to be checked?
Fire extinguishers are 6 monthly because it's a fire extinguisher. And then you've also got the MGA fire safety maintenance document that has to be completed 60 days prior to your renewal.
Yeah.
No later, no earlier, 60 days.
So as a property management business, we've had to put systems and procedures in place so that's the trigger now. From the insurance renewal date, 60 days prior, that gives our property managers the time to then schedule in the guy who comes out, does the checks, issues the certificate, give that to the client, they upload it in the portal, that comes through to MGA. There's such a lot goes on in the background that I think a lot of people don't realize that the property management team do. And then, you know, try and juggle the 6 people in that house, let all 6 of them know that you need to be into their rooms at a certain time. One of them works night shift. You can't go in there. You can't test the smoke alarms. All these things happen in the background. It's complex.
Not to mention if a tenant does something wrong and you've got to issue those breaches, and you must issue those in the correct timeframes. And the insurers are checking all of these things, right? It claims when it comes to something to do with a tenant, they're complex. And if you haven't got everything that you've just mentioned, the insurers are going to make it much more difficult. I'm not saying they're not going to pay it, but you're then going to have to go out and support. You know, you've got to give evidence to support these things in some other way. Well, if you haven't got photographic evidence that the property was in good nick when that tenant moved in, and now, you know, it looks like they've been cooking drugs and having wild parties every night, what are you going to do? Could have been like that when they moved in, for all the underwriters know.
Yeah, true. And what should whilst we're just on the topic of property management, what should someone be looking for in a property management team? Because especially in Western Australia, this is a very niche sort of area at the minute. And from what we understand, apart from student accommodation, where we've got the odd property managers that manages 5 or 10 student accommodations around a university, there's only our property management team that operates in the fashion that we do. But if someone didn't want to work with us, what should they be looking for in a property management team?
I go to you. Don't just go to you. As I said it before, if I could take your, and this is not blowing smoke, if I could take your company and stamp it all over Oz, I'd be happy, and I would only insure where they were managed by you. If I could do that, I'd have a stress-free, I'd have no grey hair. I'd be a much happier person. Look, what do they look for? You've got to look for someone who understands that you've got to be dotting your I's and crossing your T's. There's, you know, we've got to have all this document. You cannot give me your fire safety and it's, you know, late. We will decline to renew. Well, we won't, but the insurance company will decline to renew. You know, if you don't have someone who has good people skills to deal with those 6 tenants, you're going to end up with claims where there's clashes because Johnny plays his music in the bathroom when he's having a shower at night and it's at 3 a.m. because to him, he's just gotten home from work. There's just so many, as you said, intricate things with managing this. You know, time sensitive things. You've got to look, I think, for a boutique. It would have to be a boutique agency. You know, your normal everyday, and I won't say names because that might be naughty. But you know, those run-of-the-mill where you go and you have your normal property managed. They're good. They do a great job at what they're doing, but they're just managing one household. They're not managing 6 households in one. They're not set up for it. So I think you've got to go that boutique type real estate agent.
Yeah, I agree. And when we first moved into this space back in, I think it was 2015, when we did our first HMO, we went out to see some of the student accommodation, or see some of the properties that were being managed by one of the larger corporations. And let's say they've got 1,000 properties on their rent roll, and one of them is the shared house. And you could just tell it was like the annoying stepbrother or stepsister that they just couldn't be bothered with. It was kind of just left to run. The standard was poor inside. It'd never get cleaned. Maintenance was just getting left. And to be fair, they weren't renting them out for what they could truly rent out for on the market. So the investor was actually losing out as well, which meant that they were missing out on higher income, which meant they could have maintained that property to a much better standard. Which blows my mind. It still happens now. I still see it.
And look, that's the point you've made there is probably the point. These people have only got 1 or 2 on their books, and it goes for real estate as well as fire safety as well as insurance. These insurance brokers that might take 1 or 2 share houses, HMOs on their books, fire safety people who might take 1 or 2 of them, real estate agents who take 1 or 2. It's not the bulk of their book. They don't care. You know, it's not their lifeblood. It's not what they do. It's not what they focus on. Whereas people like yourself and I, this is all we do. So we're going to make sure that we do it well, and we know what we're talking about when we're talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Can we talk about the pricing and how and why the pricing has increased, or the premiums have increased? But also love to talk about the solution that's coming through as well, because you work like no one else that I know. You constantly are out there looking for solutions to the problems that are coming up. And again, I don't think people realize how much work you actually do. They just think you pick up the phone and go, yeah, this is the policy, job done. Me and you have lengthy conversations, some of them an hour to 90 minutes long. And we talk about what's going on out there, what you're trying to do, who you've been speaking to, what the outcomes are you're trying to achieve. So firstly, thank you for constantly working tirelessly, trying to keep these premiums down. I really appreciate it. And I know my investors and clients all appreciate it as well.
They'll appreciate it when I finally do win and get something that's a better price, right?
It's coming.
Then we'll throw a party and do the dance of joy for Karen.
Yeah.
Like premiums. So, and how to explain the premiums is that this market that we're in, it's a niche market, okay? It's getting bigger and bigger. But as an example, I have 900 clients. And, you know, that might generate perhaps $3 million worth of premium, okay, at our given rates. The $3 million worth of premium sounds like a ginormous amount of money until you actually look at it and break it down, okay? Have a look at our floods that we had in Queensland last year and the amount of total losses that we had. So, you know, a total loss on a house that's a $500,000 house, which then has $100,000 worth of loss of rent attached to it. It's going to have $10,000 worth of assessor fees. We're going to have demolition costs, which are over and above your, you know, $500,000 insurance premium. Before you know it, you've got a loss of $700,000, $750,000, getting really close to $1 million. Goodbye, $3 million worth of premium for the year.
4 claims, job done.
Yep. And we had a lot more than 4 claims in that flood. Not all of them were total losses, but partial losses. And then you've also got normal losses in the background where there was a hailstorm and, you know, roofs were damaged. You know, a roof to replace is over $150,000. Look at malicious damage claims by tenants. A couple of water damage claims because somebody didn't remember to check their pipe that leads to their dishwasher, their flicky mixer, and it burst and caused damage to cupboards. Claims are what push our premiums up. If we had no claims, we'd still be paying $1,100 for an insurance premium. But you look at how many claims we have, you look at the cost of repairs, so building costs again, they've increased. So when we go out there and they've got to rebuild a house, it's going to cost more than that $500,000, right? It's costing more. So premiums have had to go up because of the amount of claims that we've had in the portfolio. And insurance companies are businesses. They've got to make a profit. Otherwise, what's the point? They're not going to give us the policy out of love. It's not right, Karen. Let's give her an insurance policy. We're $3 million in the red, but yeah, let's give her the insurance policy anyway.
It's kind of like a gamble, isn't it, from their perspective?
Exactly.
They're like, how do we charge someone enough so that they'll pay it, but charge enough people that amount of money so that in the event of a claim, we've got enough funds there to pay out.
So it's odds. What are the odds that we're going to get wiped out by a storm in Queensland? 120%. Let's put the premiums up. It is. It's a bit of a gamble. Look, I'm sure that it's there's people much cleverer and higher above in a pay grade than me. They've got all the figures. They're logistic workers, and they work out the odds of all of these things happening. Hence, while you'll also sometimes see our premiums go up and our covers reduce, right? They took away flood. Why? Because we were flooding every year in Queensland. So they took it away. And that's what they do, because they're trying to reduce their losses while still providing a product that's going to suit most people. So look, the premiums this year with our current provider, they've gone up, I think, between 5 and 15%, depending on property. Pretty good, considering the last few years we were seeing 30 and 40% increases. So that's starting to slow down. The market's also changing. It's going out of the hard market, which is where insurance companies are closing their ranks and they won't insure anything out of the box, and they're counting their pennies because the financial, market's all bizarre, whatever. We're starting to come into what they call a softer market. So insurance companies are opening their doors and they're putting their foot in the water and they're testing about, what can we insure? What are we willing to insure? So the good news with that is that we have actually managed to get another 2 insurance companies to start looking at these products. They're not 100% there yet, but we are using them. We've disclosed. So we've got them to agree to a certain number of rooms. We just have to start pushing them to do the larger and the more rooms that we've got on the books.
Okay. So in number of rooms now, is it rooms that they're up to, or is it the number of people that reside in the actual property?
We're looking at the number of rooms, because obviously we can only have a single person in a room or a couple, which is viewed from an insurance perspective as a single person. So a husband or a wife, and that's why it's blood relative. They're viewed as a single household, that single room.
Cool. And is there will anything change around the fire safety aspect of things? Will it still need to be maintained 6 monthly or annually? Does it still need to be installed?
Yeah. Look, the details, watch this space. The details are still being worked on, but what we believe is it's going to be the same. It's going to be very similar. It's a procedure that we've got in place at the moment with all of these fire safety and rental, checks. It's meant that our claims have reduced. It's meant that we've got a really nice, clean book of business. So the insurers are looking at that and saying, hey, these procedures you've put in place make these good risks. So I would suggest that all of that's going to stay in place. Might be tweaked a little bit. I cannot see more being added, because what else can we add? Let's be honest, we're already doing so much. So I think all of that will stay in place. And that's a good thing. We're making sure that any of this group, any of these people that are doing this, they've got good properties and they've got good morals behind them that are keeping their tenants safe with good fire safety. We're providing clean, safe accommodation for people. We're not slumlords.
That is the top and bottom of it. We are providing clean, safe, affordable accommodation. You know, I think a lot of people, especially in the market at the minute with the rates, the way that they are, a lot of people are focusing on the returns that they're getting. We're still outperforming anything else on the market, apart from NDIS maybe. And NDIS is looking really strong at the minute, but it's a smaller market compared to HMO. But I got to the point where I did 2 or 3 properties and I was focusing on the return. And then after that, we started focusing on the outcome. And the better the outcome, the return increased automatically. So I get it. We're all investors. We all want to make a buck. We are investing so we can safeguard our financial future and build wealth. But like you said there, if we focus on providing clean, safe, affordable accommodation, the money will come.
The rest will follow. You know, we've got another 2 insurers in place. It's taken us a long time. That's not where we're stopping. We want to get more, and you know, find more and more insurers. The more competition we've got in there, hopefully it sort of keeps those premiums more balanced. You know, we can't have it too cheap. You know, it'd be lovely to go back, you know, 10 years ago when the premiums were so cheap. But as we said, if we have a claim, we wipe out all of that money that insurance company has in the kitty. Now what happens? Well, they're going to pull the insurance product. If they pull the insurance product, well, we've got nothing. So we have to protect this like it's a child. It's Freddie. We protect it.
And that takes me back to what I said earlier about, I don't think people understand how hard you work in the background. You said, look, we've got this one now. We've got these other 2 coming through. I don't want to stop there. I want to find more so that it's competitive, brings prices down, but also not down so that, you know, we're putting these guys out of business because prices are so low. I mean, at the end of the day, they're a business. They need to make a profit. But it creates competition so that right now, the company that we're working with, they've got the monopoly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think while they've been good to us over the years, they have gotten a little greedy the last couple of years. And it's really like, you know, I've always been focused on finding more because I hate them having a monopoly. It makes me very uncomfortable to have just one person, one company that I'm relying on. So yeah, they've really pushed me to push harder and harder and harder to get more and more underwriters on board, and we're starting to win. So yay! Watch this space, as we said, it'll get better.
What's happening in the NDIS and special disability accommodation space? Is there much policy going on there?
We're seeing a few. We certainly don't have the same amount as your multiple leases, but again, you know, NDIS is something new, right? Well, not really, but people are starting to talk about it. We're starting to see more of it. We can write NDIS policies. We do have an exclusion from the underwriters of robust housing. They're currently not insuring. And they also remove malicious damage by tenants from this cover. They feel that pushing it back onto the SILs, the SILs, is where that should be, because they're technically a head lease. They're responsible for the tenants that are going in there, and they think there should be some form of responsibility for the actions of the tenants based on that head tenant, that SIL provider.
Yeah, and it's a very similar concept to HMO, core living, boarding house. We've still got multiple people or participants, as the class as under the NDIS, living in a property, and they need fire safety. They need to get out of the properties easily if there is a fire, and they need to live together technically as one household, as we're supposed to do in a house of multiple occupancy. So is it the same underwriter that's offering insurance, or have we got different people to go to?
Yeah, at the moment we're only able to offer that with the current provider, and that's only because we've been able to use that argument that it's the same as our HMOs, our multi-leases. So they've gone, okay, we'll take that on board as well, and we'll write those policies. Other providers at the moment, the questions are, is it community housing? Is it NDIS? Or could it be seen as a boarding house? Any other providers, they ask those 3 questions and it's a strike. You just got nothing.
Can we finish on some insurance stories?
How many days have we got?
It'd be really good. I think it'd be a good book called The Day in the Life of an Insurance Broker, and just write down all the stories that you've got.
There could be a lot of bleeps in it. Write bleep and liquid paper out all the words, Neil. Look, what should we go on? Good stories. They're bad stories, because any of my good stories are bad because they're claims, right? We had and this one always sticks in my mind, and it always, I think it showed that it was great that the insurance broker and the underwriter were working close together and ended up getting a good result for this client. But it was a Victorian property. So it was a larger property. I think off the top of my head, they had 7 or 9. So it was a bigger place. Beautiful new build, and one of the tenants fell down a bad path and started in the drug scene. Now, that tenant eventually harassed every other tenant to the fact where they all moved out. So number one, we've got breaking of leases left, right and centre, because this guy's, coming in and thrashing things and knocking on doors and beating doors down, harassing the women, and they've all just moved out, understandably. But then, of course, he's squatting in this place and he trashed it. When we finally got in, we had ceiling fans dangling where he'd been swinging on them. We had murals of various devils and incarnations of demons on every door. Carpets had been set on fire because he was having bonfires in different areas of the road. To try and get this gentleman out, I remember at the time getting a phone call from my client's brother, and the client had actually gone to try and talk. Again, don't manage these properties by yourself. He didn't have a property manager, so he went to try and talk to this tenant. The tenant took to him with a baseball bat. So his brother called me because my client was in hospital, had been beaten with a baseball bat. The wheels of communication finally turned, and, this guy was evicted, taken from the property. We ended up lodging a claim for malicious damage by tenant, and we start the repairs on this place. It all moved fairly quickly. The owner was receiving loss of rent while this was happening. We had another phone call, it might have been 2 months into the claim and the repair. The tenant that had been evicted came back to the property and lit a fire and burnt it to the ground. So, well, it's a horrible story.
It's extreme.
It's
extreme.
I just didn't want to wake up the next day to see what would happen. But, the good part was that the insurance company already had a malicious damage claim going, where they had already started rebuilding this property, and they had a loss of rent claim going on all of that period of time. They then still paid full rebuild of that house and paid 2 years worth of loss of rent, because they had the malicious damage claim, which had covered for 12 months, and the fire claim, which was 12 months, which was a really good thing, because, I've only had a couple of total loss fires. If you're going to have a claim, don't do a total loss fire claim, because by the time the fire brigade get in and do their investigation, the police get in and do their investigations, the insurance company gets in and does their investigations, and then the 3 of them get together for a powwow down at the pub. It's 8 months in, and we still haven't had a builder go in to give us a quote on how much it's going to cost. So again, loss of rent, very important. It was a horrid claim, and it was awful. Needless to say, that tenant did end up selling the property and moving on, but he was looked after. He was extraordinarily grateful. It was a good feeling that the claim went so well, given the extreme circumstance.
Yeah. And that is an extreme story there. And that can happen in a standard rental property as well at the same time. This isn't just because it was a shared accommodation.
Right.
I know property managers that have just had issues after issues with tenants living in normal houses, can't get them out, not paying the rent, squatting. But I think the most important thing to take away from that story is they were insured and the insurance company did the right thing because they had an incredible broker.
Okay. I'm blushing again. It is all about knowing that you've got that right insurance. If they had not had insurance for multiple leases, the whole thing would have gone the other way, because the insurance companies could have turned around and declined it. They could have turned around and said, you did not declare and disclose to us that you had multiple tenants in here. You're outside of our guidelines. Here's your $2,000 back for your premium, but you're on your own, because they don't disclose things. It's so important. Disclosure, disclosure, disclosure. Don't think that by holding something in, it's going to do you a favour and that you've won by getting a claim or getting a policy across the line. You can withhold information and get a policy, but when that claim comes, you're really not a winner. You're a big loser by that stage. Tell them everything. Tell them everything. It's the way to go.
Absolutely. Bad
claims for you. We had a bad claim recently. Well, I feel it was a bad one. It was half-half. It was the recent Queensland floods. Again, it was on a multiple lease property. This property was unique in that we had a 5-bedroom house at the top and we had a granny flat at the bottom. And that's fine. We can insure two structures on one insurance policy. Someone can have a studio, a granny flat and a main house, and we do 3 structures. So this was insured as a shared accommodation, 1 lease for the granny flat and the 5 were in the main house. The floods came, water came up, destroyed the granny flat and did a little bit of damage on the share house, not too much. Assessors came in, and the next thing I know, I get a phone call from the assessors. The owner is living in the granny flat. The owner's living in the granny flat. So the owner had not told us they were living in the granny flat. They're not allowed to live on the property. Doesn't matter, that's a separate structure. You're still on that title. The owner was living there. That granny flat was a swanky granny flat. I think the total cost to rebuild that came to 260 grand.
Yeah, they're up there now. Granny flats are expensive.
It was a bit of a mess, and that was not covered by insurance because the owners were living in that property. The underwriters could actually have declined on the share house side of it as well, given that the owners were living in the property. They could have turned around and said no. As it was, they did deal with the damage that was in the share house because it was that separate structure. I wouldn't like to push my luck with that again. But there was no cover for that owner. It is so important to tell your broker absolutely everything. Don't hide a single thing from us, because you'll have nothing when it comes to a claim. So that's probably one of the worst claims that we've had to deal with in recent years.
And the moral of the story there is, everybody still needs affordable accommodation. If you are considering setting up shared accommodation and living in it yourself, and you've got a friend that's also doing it, live in each other's houses.
Yes,
that's the
solution,
outcome.
Right? Perfect solution. Give your house to your daughter, so it's in her name, and live in the place. But don't ever live in it yourself. Yeah. And I don't know, do you really want to live with your tenants, Neil?
We've got a few people that have taken their properties back and lived in them themselves. And it's also a part of our property management policy as well, that we won't manage a property if an owner does live in a property, mainly because we know that the insurance would be void. But we also, it's just very complex trying to manage a property when the owner lives there and they're just constantly feeding everything back to the property manager that they don't like, back with that emotional connection that they've got.
And exactly.
Yeah. So no, I wouldn't like to live with my tenants, but I know some people may need to due to the financial circumstances. But there's got to be a solution out there where they rent a room somewhere else and rent that one out.
Yeah. And look, that's not restricted to share house either, I might add. It's also, if you have a house of your own and you decide to have boarders in that property, just be very aware that you are disclosing it to the insurance company, because they're few and far that will allow you to have boarders. You have to actually take out a specific insurance policy that is covering owners and non-family members. Okay, so, even if it's your son's mates that are renting your granny flat for, $100 a week, or they mightn't even be charged anything. It just might be letting them live there. They're still non-family members. You must disclose it to your underwriter or to your broker or to whoever.
And this is happening a lot lately because we have got the cost of living is increasing, so people are looking at ways to bring that monthly cost down. We've got over 12 million empty bedrooms right across the country, so people are starting to rent out their extra bedrooms for a premium to give people accommodation, but also to bring their cost of living down as well. So there'll be a lot of people that might be listening to this podcast, or maybe should listen to this specific episode. Yeah, because there's a lot of tips in this podcast that people can use, and even if they don't come to you, Karen, then they can go out there and do the right thing themselves.
Insurance wording, so your PDS, there's a really important line in all of them that talks about liability insurance, and it says that under the liability section, we will not cover you or yours. Okay, so in other words, husband, you can't sue yourself. Husband can't sue a wife. Kids can't sue dad. You just can't do that. Where the discussion comes in is, who is yours? Yours, by the Webster Dictionary, ends up coming out someone who usually lives with you. Boom, there's your tenant, or there's your boarder. They usually live with you. Now, I've argued this point with multiple underwriters because I do like an argument every now and again, and the argument's been, well, they're on a rooming agreement. So it has a start, it has an end. They don't usually live with me. It's just for this period of time. No, that's not how they're viewing it. We've used every argument in the book. We've got one underwriter, one out of all of them that we use, that allows us to have owners and family members, and it doesn't become a decline. So very important to check your policy if you're doing that, and that you've got yourself covered.
Lots and lots of good tips in this podcast, Karen. Thank you very much. How can people find you if they need to reach out to you?
Look, as you can tell, I'm a bit of a chatter, so you're probably best going for my email. So it's karen.takken@mga.com. I don't know if you put something up here.
Yep, down here.
Yeah, up there. Look, my telephone number, you'll have that as well. I have a very small team. We have myself, we have Nathan, and we have Caleb. We are always on the phone. Leave a message or send us an email. We will always get back to you. It may not always be that day. We do strive to do that, but sometimes we've just got to give it a rest and, go and spend some time with family. We will get back to you, okay? And, yeah, emails are usually best because then we can contact you as soon as we're free. Or if we're sitting on the phone, and people probably don't know this, we can sit on the phone with insurance companies for hours waiting for them, number one, to answer, number two, to find the answer to our questions, or arguing claims and whatever with them. So if you send us an email, we can usually email at the same time while we're waiting on hold.
Multitasking. Karen, thank you very much for coming on the podcast today. Thank you for all the information that you shared.
You're welcome.
Let's do it again in the future. When things change and we get these new policies in place and we get a few more NDISs to the underwriters, let's do it again and see if anything changes.
See where we are. See how well I've done. Yeah. We can have a chart.
score you out of 10.
Can I have gold stars? I can have gold stars.
Karen Takken, thank you very much.
Thanks, Neil. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you tune in the same time next week so you stay up to date with all the cash flow positive property updates.